My name is Natalie Green. I found out my own brother had hired a private investigator to dig into my life, not out of concern, but to expose me as a failure in front of our entire family. But what he discovered ended up destroying his own life. I wasn't freeloading. I didn't live off anyone. I was the chief technology officer of a cybersecurity company. And I never told anyone that I owned more than $4 million in assets. Why would a brother want to expose his own sister? And if it were you, would you reveal your brother's secret, even knowing it might tear the family apart? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel to hear the full story. How one Sunday dinner shattered my family forever. And this is how it all began. I used to think I was the offbeat note in an otherwise perfect family harmony. Since I was a kid, I was nothing like Ethan, my older brother. He came into the world glowing. Fast runner, top student, brought his first girlfriend home at 15, and never sat in the background of any family story. Ethan was always the center. And me? I had asthma, was scrawny, always had an inhaler strapped to my back, constantly asking to leave class mid-lesson. Every time I had a coughing fit in front of others, my mom would grip my hand tightly and hiss through clenched teeth. "Please stop drawing attention to yourself, Natalie." My dad didn't speak much. His looks were always the same. Quiet, distant, like he'd been waiting for a different daughter. Stronger, with fewer tears. Ethan once shoved me down when I was 10 because I wouldn't hand over the TV remote. I still remember how my mom saw the whole thing, sighed, and said, "Don't provoke your brother. He carries a lot of responsibility in this house." Lena, the youngest, used to cling to me as a child, but as she grew, she quickly learned how to be the ideal daughter. Smile at the right time, nod when needed, stay silent when mom frowned. Lena was beautiful, gentle, married at 19, in a cream-colored wedding surrounded by lavender, where I was seated at the table next to the kitchen. I, on the other hand, didn't know how to speak sweetly or sit quietly when insulted. And I never figured out how to make my parents see me as someone of worth. I had tried. I got into college on a partial scholarship, a small public school in the suburbs, not well known. I majored in game design. My mom said nothing when I told her. My dad only asked, "So you plan to sit at a computer for life and call that a career?" But the breaking point was my 20th birthday. They invited extended family over for dinner, and my mom asked me to say something nice to show my thanks. I stood up, heart pounding, trying to keep my voice steady. I said I would follow my passion in gaming. I wanted to design the kinds of worlds I used to dream about when left alone in my room. Worlds where I was strong, chosen, and seen. The table went silent. Then Ethan laughed. "Passion? Did she say gaming passion?" He said loud enough for everyone to hear, and the relatives burst out laughing. "Guess she's about to invent Candy Crush, too." Mom said nothing. Dad lifted his wine glass. No one defended me. Lena stared down at the tablecloth. And I realized, no matter how hard I tried, I'd never be the pride they were hoping for. A week later, I dropped out. I left my dorm at midnight, stuffed a few clothes into a backpack, and caught the last bus out of town. I didn't leave a note. No one called to ask where I was. They were used to my silence, used to me disappearing. And they thought that proved the inherent weakness they always pinned on me. But what they didn't know was that from that night, the night I left without a sound, I started rebuilding my life from the rubble. Not to prove anything to them, but to survive, in my own way. I lived in an old silver gray van for nearly 7 months. Not because I thought it was freeing or romantic like those inspirational blog posts, but because I ran out of money. And I didn't want to go home. I parked behind a public library in a San Diego suburb. Each morning, I washed my face in the public restroom, charged my laptop inside the library, and taught myself coding through free courses. I had one rule: write at least one clean, error-free block of code each day. No one checked on me, no one asked if I was tired. But for the first time, I felt truly responsible for my life. At night, I locked the van with 3 layers, put on 3 sweaters, and listened to cybersecurity podcasts until I fell asleep. One day, I commented on a game developer forum, responding to a user named Lex404 who had asked about patching a flaw in Bastion's old game engine. 2 minutes later, they replied, "Thanks, your debugging was super clean. Never seen someone take that approach." 3 days later, they messaged me privately and asked to do a video call. And that was the first time I saw Alexis Ford. She sat in a room filled with anime posters. Long curly hair, black-rimmed glasses, voice fast and sharp. She said bluntly, "Hey, I don't have many gamer girlfriends. You're the first one who got what I meant by pixel bleeding. So, partner up?" From then on, we met on Zoom every day. 3 months later, I moved to Seattle, crashed on her living room floor while we built Firewall Fox, a cybersecurity platform for indie games, which later expanded to medical security for small hospitals. No ribbon cutting, no investors, just 2 girls, 1 old IKEA desk, and 3 portable drives. At first, our clients were small dev teams who couldn't afford big firms. But a major data leak from a mid-size game studio brought attention. After that, Firewall Fox signed its first contract with a small hospital system in Oregon to build out data protection protocols. The next 6 years passed quietly. We lived on instant noodles and coded through the night. I dove into AI for security. Alexis built a behavioral-based threat detection system. Neither of us shined, but our software started getting mentions at industry conferences. Back then, I still drove a 2004 Honda, rented an apartment, and never talked about where I came from. In year 7, a multinational security firm offered to acquire Firewall Fox. They didn't just want the software. They wanted the core research team. Alexis wanted out to pursue investigative journalism. As for me, I nodded. I was bought out in cash, preferred shares, and the right to continue developing my own tech in their lab. The deal was worth $6.8 million, split in half. After taxes and expenses, I walked away with around $3.8 million. And like everything I'd ever had in life, I didn't tell anyone. I moved to Tacoma, bought a 2-bedroom house under my private company's name, and started driving a refurbished old Saturn Ion. I worked part-time as a CTO for a new startup focused on breach risk analysis for rural hospital systems. I still lived simply. Still reused furniture from flea markets, still ate canned soup. The only additions were a small safe in my home office and an encrypted security file cataloging my personal assets, in case something happened. Not because I feared robbery, but because I knew the people who once overlooked me would be the first to come back the moment they sensed I was worth something. I knew something was off when I received a login alert from my personal tax account security system. The IP address came from Columbus, Ohio, where Ethan lived. At the same time, I discovered someone trying to unlock my credit storage account. No one outside of my family even knew I used that service. I quietly monitored it for a few more days. This time, a property ownership request was submitted under the company name that held my house title. From a temporary email address, traced to a low-tier private investigator firm based in the state's Central District. I didn't panic. I documented everything, and then I called Daniel. We met at a regional cybersecurity conference. Daniel had once worked for the FBI, specializing in cybercrime and insider espionage. After an early retirement, he launched his own firm, handling data breach crises for major corporations. He had this way of looking at people that made me both admire and fear him. The kind of person who could read you without saying a word. I sent Daniel everything I had gathered. He read through it, then looked up and asked, "Are you sure Ethan's the only one with a motive? If it were Mom, she'd ask directly. If it were Dad, he wouldn't know how to use these tools. Lena, I don't think she has the time." Daniel didn't say anything else. He picked up his phone. 2 days later, I received a preliminary report. The person who hired the PI firm was Ethan Green. They were prepaid with a credit card in Ethan's name. The transaction note read, "Background check, Natalie Green." I sat frozen for nearly 30 minutes after reading that line. My brother didn't even try to hide it. He hired someone to run a background check on me like I was a threat to the family. No calls, no questions, no warning, silent monitoring. Like I was a stranger. Daniel came to my house that night, carrying a hard drive with the full trace files. He sat down in the armchair, placed a cup of hot tea in front of me, and spoke slowly. "There's something else you should know." I looked at him. While tracing the PI network, I found some suspicious financial activity. A few wire transfers between Ethan and his company didn't line up. After cross-checking the data, I found out Ethan had been using an internal HR account to access the personal records of several coworkers. One of them reported it internally 3 months ago. There's an ongoing internal investigation, and if I'm right, Ethan's about to be fired or charged. I set the cup down, my throat dry. Daniel went on. I also found the third mortgage record on his house. Ethan owes more than $240,000, and his income doesn't cover the principal and interest. And last year's tax refund shows signs of misreporting. I leaned back, my head spinning. My brother, the same man who lectured me at every dinner table that adults take responsibility, that you need to learn financial balance, was now hiding a personal crisis in both money and ethics. I stared at my laptop screen. Daniel sat beside me, saying nothing. After a while, I whispered, "Why do you think Ethan did this?" Daniel paused, thoughtful. Then he said, "Maybe because you used to be the shadow, and when you stopped being the shadow, it shook the people who always stood in the light." I pressed my lips together, holding back the wave inside me. I never intended to expose Ethan. Honestly, I wanted peace. But what I held in my hands now wasn't a private matter between siblings. This was a legal violation, a breach of privacy, a deliberate act of financial manipulation. I closed my laptop, then looked at Daniel. "I don't have to do anything, do I?" He looked at me, no judgment in his eyes. "No. But if you do nothing, you're letting someone else define you by the way they twist the truth. Defending yourself isn't revenge, it's a boundary. And I knew, this time, I wouldn't let anyone cross that boundary again. Not even someone named Green. Not even someone who once called me little sister. I didn't usually go to Sunday dinners. In fact, over the past 7 years, I'd only shown up twice. Once because Lena begged, "Come on, for the family," and once when Dad dislocated his shoulder during a snowstorm. The rest of the time, I always had an excuse. Busy with work, traveling, not feeling well. They didn't ask much. Maybe because, to them, I'd been on the sidelines for so long. But this time, I came. No notice, no text. The sky was overcast that day. I drove the old Saturn from Tacoma to my parents' house north of Seattle. The house looked the same. Cream-colored walls, Mom's yellow chrysanthemums by the walkway, and a little welcome fall flag hanging on the front porch. Lena was laying out pie on the table when I stepped in. She looked up, a bit surprised, then smiled. "You actually came?" Ethan hadn't seen me yet. He was in the living room, loudly bragging about last month's sales in that familiar, boastful tone. "Escalade without haggling a single dollar. I'm telling you, this business is about psychology, not machines, Lena." I walked past, hung my coat, and nodded toward Dad. He gave me a brief glance, said nothing. Mom came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron, and looked at me like she was measuring something in my face. "Natalie, you look, better lately." I didn't reply. Dinner started. As always, Ethan talked the most. He shared about his Florida trip, the new remote control plane he bought for his 2 boys, his plan to invest in real estate. I quietly cut my ham pie, didn't interrupt. Lena sat next to me, gently adding more steamed vegetables to my plate. Mom glanced over from time to time, sighing softly whenever I didn't chime in. You still don't have anyone? She asked mid-meal. I looked at her. The familiar question, the familiar tone, always the same. I worry, that's all. A woman should have a solid anchor. A stable man. Like Ethan, for example. I glanced at Ethan. Sitting tall, he leaned back in his chair like he was soaking in invisible applause, then looked over at me. If you need a real job, Natalie, we're always short on paperwork staff. Doesn't need to be smart, needs to show up. I set my knife down, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, said nothing. Quietly, I opened my bag, pulled out a black USB drive, and placed it on the wooden table between the salad bowl and the cranberry juice. The room fell silent. If anyone wants to know how I've been living, I said slowly, eyes locked on Ethan, this file might help. My mother frowned. Lena stopped eating. My dad looked at me for the first time since I walked in. Ethan scoffed. What is this, a resume? You finally job hunting for real? He reached for the USB but stopped. Maybe he realized this wasn't a joke. Natalie, what are you trying to do? My mother asked, her voice sharp. I gently turned the USB drive. I didn't do anything. I brought the exact report Ethan paid someone to create. About me. Same firm, same author. Ethan's face went pale. What are you saying? I looked up, eyes locked on him. You hired a private investigator to run a background check on me, to find out how I live, my address, my accounts, tax records, even where I registered my car. I found out last week, and I hired that same firm to investigate you back, not out of revenge, but to understand why you did it. The table went dead silent. The sound of Lena's fork hitting her plate rang loud and clear. Ethan shot up. You're lying. Who do you think you are? The person you once thought had nothing to lose. I cut in, voice calm. My mother staggered to her feet. That's enough. Natalie, this is family. This is not the place for your tech garbage. You don't wonder how Ethan knew I bought a house in Tacoma? Or why someone tried to access my tax account? No one in this family knew I used that service, except Ethan. My father set his glass down heavily on the table. He didn't speak. But he knew. I looked at Ethan. His face was flushed red, breathing hard, his hands clenched on the back of his chair. I warned you, I said quietly, turning to Daniel, who had entered through the back door holding a laptop. Everyone turned. Daniel nodded politely. Good evening. I'm the one who verified the authenticity of this report. Ethan took a step back. I sat still, watching the people who once saw me as a shadow in a house full of light. This time, I stepped forward. Not to be seen, but to ensure I would never be erased again. The report was 47 pages long. Daniel didn't need to read every line. He projected a few key pages, starting with the email where Ethan signed the contract with the PI firm and logs of unauthorized access to my credit data. No one spoke when the total of my current assets appeared, more than $3.8 million, most of it from the sale of the company 7 years ago. My mother's mouth hung open. Lena turned away, covering her mouth like trying to swallow something sharp. My father froze, staring at the screen, then at me. I thought that was it. But then Daniel scrolled to the final section of the report. A page in burnt orange titled, Public Record Unresolved Internal Complaints. I glanced over, stunned. April 12th, last year. Allegation of child abuse, under investigation. Named party, Ethan Green. Victim, Jacob Green, age 12. Mr. Ethan's wife, Claire, suddenly stood, her chair clattering to the floor behind her. Her face went ghostly pale, lips trembling. What? What is this? Ethan sprang up. Don't listen to that. It's garbage. Jacob fell while playing soccer. I told you. Claire staggered backward, her eyes fixed on the screen like she was hypnotized. Then why did the school report hand-shaped bruises on his left arm? Why did the nurse send a report to Child Protective Services? You never said a word. Ethan, did you hit our son? No, it's not what you think, Ethan stammered. He was mouthing off. I just held his arm. I didn't. Not what I think? You hit our son and then hired someone to investigate your sister? And you lecture us about values every week? Claire screamed, her voice nearly gone. Jacob, a 13-year-old boy with tousled blonde hair, stood silently in the living room doorway. No one had noticed when he arrived. He wasn't crying. He stood there, clutching an old stuffed dog, staring at his father like he was a stranger. I walked toward Jacob. Are you okay? I asked softly. He didn't answer, only gave a slow nod. Then he pulled a phone from his back pocket and tapped a button. Claire froze. Jacob, who are you calling? Mom's lawyer, he said quietly with no hesitation. The whole table was silent. Ethan shouted, Turn that phone off. I'm your father. Who taught you? Don't come near him, I said, voice low. Ethan turned to me, his eyes bloodshot. This is all your fault. You've torn this family apart. You had nothing, so now you want to drag the rest of us down with you? Claire stepped forward, standing between Ethan and me. No, Ethan. You dug this hole yourself. And now, you're falling in alone. Lena remained seated, her eyes darting back and forth in shock. My mother slumped into her chair, hands shaking. No way. Ethan wouldn't do that. He's not that kind of person. Did you ever ask your grandson how he felt? Clara turned to her, voice breaking. Or did you only care whether Ethan made enough money and looked like a real man? My father lowered his head. For the first time, he spoke. We've been wrong for far too long. His voice didn't sound like a gavel. It sank, heavy and late, as if he'd lost too many years before admitting something he should have said decades ago. Daniel shut off the screen. I picked up the USB and slipped it into my coat pocket. When Ethan hired someone to dig into my life, he didn't think he was also exposing the rot inside his own. The part he tried to cover with polish, platitudes, and constant pride. But that's the price of arrogance. It doesn't strip away image. It exposes the core. And this time, no one was shielding him anymore. Ethan slammed his hand on the table, knocking over my father's water glass, leaving a wet trail across the tablecloth. His face burned red, chin twitching with each shallow breath. This is all your fault, Natalie, he roared. You've always been the problem in this house, always gloomy, always playing the victim to get attention. And now what? You're rich, so you come back to prove something? You want to ruin me. You're seriously sick. I said nothing. Didn't flinch. I simply looked at him, eyes steady. You think money covers everything you lack? You spent your life in the shadows, and now you think stepping into the light makes you some kind of hero? Daniel gently placed a hand on my shoulder, a silent reminder. I didn't have to say anything. Ethan turned to our parents. Why aren't you saying anything? Are you all really taking her side? She was never part of this family. She doesn't know sacrifice. She's never done anything for anyone but herself. Claire, his wife, remained silent, gripping her phone, eyes red and swollen. Behind her, Jacob stood still, his face stiff and unreadable. I looked at my mother. She still hadn't spoken. Her face was twisted with anger, confusion, and fear. Ethan turned back, voice sharper now. You're a messed up freak, Natalie. I knew it. No family, no husband, no kids. You live alone like a damn weirdo, and now you come back to drag everyone into your mess. You're... Enough! A voice rang out, strong and unwavering. Everyone turned. Lena pushed back her chair, the wooden legs scraping against the floor as she rose. She positioned herself between me and Ethan, hands clenched, voice shaking but firm. You don't get to talk to our sister like that, not anymore. Ethan froze. You're taking her side? You've lost it, Lena. Lena shook her head. No, I've finally woken up. All our lives we treated her like a shadow, like the problem. But look around. She's the only one here, not speaking with cruelty, not casting blame, not hurting anyone. My mother gasped for air. Lena. No, Mom. Please hear me. All our lives, Natalie was the one left behind. She wasn't allowed to be sick or tired or wrong. She lived quietly so no one would be upset, so you could feel proud, so Dad wouldn't shake his head. But we never once asked what she needed, or what she felt, or what hurt. Her voice cracked, then choked. We pushed her out of this family table a long time ago. Today, she came back, but not to ask to be let in. She came to set the record straight. Ethan stepped back, scanning the room like searching for an ally. But no one said a word. Claire whispered, "You should leave, Ethan." He stared at her. "You too?" "Go," she repeated. Ethan turned to me. His rage was gone. All that remained was confusion, hurt, and something that looked a lot like fear. He turned away, walked quickly toward the door. His coat slipped from the hook, but he didn't pick it up. The door slammed shut behind him, echoing through the heavy stillness of the house. I don't know how long it was before my mother finally spoke. "I'll never see this in bed. Tim, we should end dinner here." Lena bowed her head. Claire led her son gently down the hall. My father rose slowly and stepped out onto the porch, saying nothing at all. I sat alone at the table, next to the spilled glass of water and the silent USB drive resting on the wooden surface. The suffocating air of decades finally cracked open. 3 days after that shattered evening, I received an email from my mother. The subject line was simple: "Family is meant to lean on one another." I stared at it on my screen for nearly 10 minutes before clicking. The message was short, just a few lines, but every word felt like it had been carved with a knife. "You should help your brother through this crisis. He's your blood, and you have money. No greeting, no apology, a demand, wrapped in the same old moral code I was raised on. Endurance is sacrifice, giving is duty." I saved the email, took a screenshot, and added it to a folder named Family Records, where I'd started collecting everything since last week. That afternoon, I spoke with Daniel in the backyard. He had just made coffee. I was watering the plants. The wind moved the white curtain hanging from the porch, and sunlight slanted across the grass. "I don't think they understand," I said, eyes still on the blooming tomato vines. "It's not that I don't want to help, Ethan. It's that I don't want to be used like a default wallet, like my money exists to patch the holes they created." Daniel sat down across from me, fingers laced together. "You don't have to explain anything to anyone, but if you let them keep doing this, they'll always believe you have no boundaries. So, what should I do now?" Daniel pulled a stack of documents from his briefcase. "First, the will. I've prepared a template. Not because we're expecting the worst, but to make sure that if anything ever happens, you control how your assets are used." I picked up the papers, skimming the sections titled Beneficiaries, Personal Assets, Emergency Guardianship. Daniel continued. "Second, I think you should consider separating all assets under your real name from anything traceable to your old address or public records. We can use an LLC to shield them, and if needed, we'll change your personal credit ID. Just as a precaution, but a necessary one. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was protecting something more than money. My living space, my peace, and my right to decide." Daniel looked at me, his expression softening. "And last, you have every right to stop engaging with them, temporarily or permanently, not out of resentment, but for emotional safety. If they keep seeing you as the redemption tool for someone else's mistakes, then there's no reason you have to keep playing that part." A breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth. When I was little, every time Ethan shoved or yelled at me, Mom would say, "He's your brother. Don't hold it against him. Be gentle. Families need peace." But now I understood. Peace isn't about avoiding raised voices. Peace is when no one is forced to carry the burden of someone else's refusal to take responsibility. That night, I printed every document Daniel gave me and signed each section. My hand didn't shake. I didn't hesitate. Before turning off the lights, I reopened my mother's email. Then I typed a single sentence. Not to send, just to keep for myself. I'm not rejecting my family. I'm rejecting being treated like an interest-free bank. I saved the line in the same folder, then shut down the computer. Not everyone understands boundaries, but I won't wait for others to understand before I start protecting mine. I haven't been back to my parents' house since that dinner, but I did return to another place, the one where I used to stand at the end of the flagpole line, Glenridge Elementary School. The school sits at the end of a small maple-shaded street. The old white-trimmed windows are still there. Classroom 6, where classmates once mocked me for carrying an inhaler, has been repainted light green, but the blackboard is the same. The faint smell of chalk still lingers like an unfaded memory. Daniel walked beside me, his hand loosely resting in mine. "You remember everything so clearly," he whispered. "I used to think I'd never come back here. But I also used to think I'd never be able to live differently. And at least I did." We stopped at the small school auditorium. On the modest wooden stage hung a simple white banner. The Invit Scholarship ceremony sponsored by alumni Natalie Greeny. I stepped up to the podium with a sheet of paper folded in 4. Not to read, just to remind myself that this time, I was allowed to tremble, allowed to speak in my own way, no need to be perfect. I looked down at rows of students, most not yet in their teens. Their faces glowed with excitement. But I knew, somewhere in that crowd, a few eyes felt like mine once did. Lowered when someone laughed, blinking fast when called a misfit. I used to sit right here. I was that sickly kid, that quiet kid, the invisible one. And I used to believe that only if I became someone extraordinary would I deserve to be loved. I paused, glancing toward the back of the auditorium. But in the end, I didn't need applause to have value. I only needed to be myself. In the right way, in the right place. And today, I want the kids who've felt overlooked to know that too. This scholarship is for you. For those brave enough to keep going even when no one's cheering. After the ceremony, the principal, a woman in her 60s, shook my hand, eyes misty. A little girl with brown skin and messy curls ran up and hugged me tightly without saying a word. Daniel stood behind, snapping photos with an old film camera. That afternoon, when we got home, I found an envelope quietly resting on the doorstep. No return address. But I recognized the handwriting from the very first word. Dear Natalie. I lowered myself onto the porch bench and opened the letter with my bare hands, slowly. I don't know where to begin. Maybe you won't want to read this, and I understand. But that day, when everything fell apart, I looked at you and saw someone I'd admired all my life but never had the courage to stand beside. I'm sorry. For being silent too long while you were treated unfairly, right in front of me. I set the letter down, my hands trembling. After all these years, it was the first recognition I'd received with no strings attached. No guilt, no bargaining. It came late, but not to ask for anything, only to return a piece of justice that had been missing. That morning, the small schoolyard was bathed in soft golden sunlight, the leaves beginning to turn, a quiet whisper of fall. Plastic chairs were lined up beside the grassy field. Kids darted around with new backpacks. An adult smiled gently, holding jackets in the early chill. I settled in on the outer row, with Daniel and Lena on either side. A chestnut-colored scarf draped loosely around my neck, my hands cradling a small gift box wrapped in craft paper and tied with ribbon. Inside was a set of basic coding books for children, along with a fox-shaped USB drive I once used as my startup mascot. The school's smaller than I expected, Daniel said, still watching the kids playing on the far end. Yeah, but it's where I first learned to hide in the library during recess, I replied, voice light. Lena turned to look at me. She wore an olive knit dress today, her hair pulled back neatly, her eyes carrying a calm I hadn't seen in her before. You know, I used to think you didn't want to play with me, but now I realize maybe you were trying to breathe and no one noticed. A moment later, the kids were called to line up. Lena's middle child, her name was Riley, kept glancing back at me. She had clear gray eyes, shoulder-length hair, and the way she clutched the drawstring of her backpack reminded me of myself. When the principal began to speak, Riley slipped out of line, ran back to me, and tugged on my sleeve. Auntie Nat, can you teach me how to code? I blinked in surprise, then smiled. Why do you want to learn? Because I want to make a game where no one kicks me off the team. I bent down to meet her eyes. I'll never let him out. Okay, but it might be hard, and sometimes you might feel like you're not as good as the others. That's okay, as long as someone doesn't leave me behind, she said, gripping my hand like I'd vanish if she let go. Daniel chuckled softly beside me, then leaned in to whisper, You think we could do it? Make a family? I looked around the schoolyard, the same one that once made me shrink into invisibility. Now, the trees, the benches, they were still there. But I wasn't hiding anymore. I was sitting in the sunlight, head high, body steady, no longer waiting for rescue. I looked at Riley, at Daniel, at Lena waving to her youngest as he walked into his first class. Then I turned to him. I think I'm ready. But this time, it's a family we choose. Daniel took my hand. Riley leaned into my shoulder. On the field, the bell rang. Kids laughed out loud. And for once, I no longer had to brace myself to exist. Have you ever felt overlooked in your own family, where every effort went unseen, and only when you succeeded did they return, not to acknowledge you, but to demand from you? I know everyone will see this story differently. Maybe you relate to Natalie. Or maybe you've been Lena, the one who took too long to realize someone's silence was actually a cry to be heard. If you have any thoughts after hearing this story, please share them in the comments. I'd love to know what moment struck you most. Was it when Natalie placed the USB on the dinner table? Or when her little niece looked up and asked, Can you teach me how to code? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow the channel to stay connected with more heartfelt, honest stories about family, boundaries, and the choices we make for ourselves.